There's a design trend spreading through custom home builds right now that architects are calling one of the biggest shifts in over a decade. And according to nearly every national homebuyer color survey published in the last 2 years, most buyers say they would never choose it. Steeply pitched black roof lines, arched openings instead of the standard farmhouse gable, walls the color of wet asphalt and cast iron. It's called Modern Gothic, and right now it's showing up on multi-million-dollar custom estates and on mid-budget barndominiums built on 40 acres in rural Texas at the same time. So why does a look at the data says most people avoid keep getting built? And when someone commits a 6-figure exterior budget to it, does the house actually hold its value? Or does it age like a Halloween decoration nobody took down? Stick around, because the answer isn't as simple as trendy or timeless, and it depends on decisions most homeowners never think to ask about. If you want more breakdowns like this on unusual homes, real budgets, and floor plans that actually work, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a like so this channel keeps growing. Now, back to the story. Say the word Gothic to most people, and they picture Halloween. Bats, cobwebs, a haunted Victorian on a hill. That's not what we're talking about. Modern Gothic, as architects are using the term in 2026, borrows a narrow set of elements from 12th century cathedral design and 18th century Gothic revival estates, then strips away almost everything ornamental. What's left are pointed arches instead of rounded or rectangular openings. Steep, dramatic roof lines that pull the eye upward. Deep, saturated color, charcoal, black, oxblood, forest green, instead of the beige and grayish that dominated the last 10 years of American home design. And a deliberate use of contrast. Dark walls against warm wood, black steel against brass hardware, shadow against a single dramatic light source. Architecture publications tracking 2026 design trends describe this as part of a larger pushback against what one industry piece bluntly called millennial gray, the flat, white box, monochromatic minimalism that defined new construction for most of the 2010s and early 2020s. That style photographed well and sold fast, but it also became the design equivalent of white noise. Every listing looked the same. Every kitchen had the same gray island, the same white oak floor, the same brass faucet. Modern Gothic is one of several movements, alongside Neo-Art Deco and contemporary classicism, that architects point to as evidence buyers are craving something with more emotional weight, something a photo can't fully capture, a space that feels different to stand inside, not just different to look at online. For a barndominium specifically, this trend lines up almost too well with the structure itself. A post frame or steel frame building already wants a simple, bold roofline. It already uses metal as its primary skin, pushing that metal toward black, and pushing the roof pitch steeper with a pointed gable instead of shallow farmhouse slope doesn't require reinventing the building type. It requires leaning harder into what a barndominium already is. That's the appeal. Now here's the complication. If you look at what the broader home buying public actually says it wants, Modern Gothic shouldn't work at all. A national survey conducted by the Harris Poll on behalf of a major exterior products manufacturer found that off-white and cream remain the most popular siding color choice for American homeowners, chosen by roughly 1 in 5 respondents planning an exterior update, and that's been true for 3 years running. Over 40% of homeowners surveyed said they'd choose a timeless, neutral exterior color if updating their home. Bold colors ranked as the least likely choice across the board, with a third of respondents naming a bold color as one they'd actively avoid. That's not a fringe data point. That's the mainstream housing market, the one that determines what a typical appraiser expects to see, what a typical buyer's agent recommends, and what a typical lender considers safe collateral. So a homeowner who commits to a true black exterior, pointed arches, and a dramatic steep roofline is deliberately building outside the range that survey data says protects resale value fastest. That's a real financial tension, not a manufactured one. But here's what that survey doesn't capture. It's measuring the mass market. It's measuring what the average homeowner updating a 3-bedroom ranch wants to do to sell quickly in a competitive, comp-driven neighborhood. It is not measuring the custom and luxury segment, where the entire point of the build is to not look like the house next door. In that segment, the one barndominiums increasingly compete in, distinctiveness itself is the value driver. A buyer paying for a fully custom post-frame home on acreage isn't shopping the same way as a buyer comparing 3 nearly identical spec homes on a cul-de-sac. So the real answer to does modern Gothic hurt resale isn't yes or no. It's compare to what market and built with what materials. Which brings us to the part most homeowners get wrong before they ever pour a foundation. To understand where this trend actually earns its cost and where it becomes a liability, it helps to walk through a composite example, a build put together from the material and cost figures builders and siding manufacturers are currently reporting for 2026 rather than any single name project. Picture a 2,400 square foot barndominium on a rural lot. The footprint is simple, a rectangle with a covered porch, but the roofline is not. Instead of the shallow 412 or 512 pitch typical of a standard post-frame shell, this one runs a steeper 812 to 1012 pitch on a main gable, with a secondary cross gable breaking up the front elevation. That steeper pitch is what gives the silhouette its cathedral-like verticality. It also adds real cost. More roofing material per square foot of footprint, more complex framing of the ridge and valleys, and a longer timeline, because steep pitch metal roofing takes more careful fastening and flashing than a low-slope agricultural roof. The exterior skin is where the Gothic identity really shows up. Corrugated or standing seam steel panels in a near black charcoal, not true black. A distinction that matters more than it sounds like it should, and we'll come back to that. Steel siding for a barndominium currently runs somewhere between $4 and $8 per square foot installed. According to figures from siding manufacturers and cost tracking sites in 2026, with the exact number depending on panel profile, finish, and region. A seamless, concealed fastener panel. The cleaner, more architectural look that reads as designed rather than agricultural sits at the higher end of that range, sometimes reaching into the mid-teens per square foot for premium profiles. At the base of the walls, roughly the bottom third of the front elevation, the design switches material entirely to stone or manufactured stone veneer. This isn't decorative for its own sake. It solves two problems at once. First, a home clad entirely in dark metal can read as thin and industrial. No matter how steep the roof is, stone at the base gives the eye a sense of mass and permanence, the same visual cue Gothic cathedrals used with load-bearing masonry centuries ago. Second, and more practically, stone veneer is one of the materials appraisers consistently rate higher than vinyl or aging wood siding when assessing exterior condition and quality, a real factor when it comes time to refinance or sell. Stone veneer typically runs $10 to $20 per square foot, natural stone more, so it's used strategically rather than across the entire building. The arches are the most visually distinctive and most expensive decision in the whole build. A standard rectangular window or door opening is a stock product. A pointed arch opening requires either a custom steel header fabrication or a specialty window manufacturer, and in either case, expect a meaningful premium over a same-sized rectangular unit, often 2 to 4 times the cost per opening, depending on the fabricator. Most builders working in this style don't arch every window. They arch the front door, maybe one great room window, and leave the rest rectangular. That restraint keeps the signature look without multiplying the custom fabrication cost across a dozen openings. Inside, the great room runs the full pitch of that steep roofline, an open volume with exposed black steel, trusses meeting at a ridge point, the same structural framing you'd find in a cathedral nave, just built in steel instead of stone and timber. The walls are a deep charcoal or matte black below chair rail height, transitioning to warm white oak plank above, which keeps the room from feeling like a cave. Lighting is layered deliberately. Dark walls absorb light rather than bouncing around the way white walls do, so the electrical plan needs more fixtures, more dimmable zones, and warmer color temperature bulbs than a bright, neutral interior would require. That's a real line item most first-time builders underestimate. A moody room isn't just a paint choice. It's a lighting design problem that costs more to solve correctly. The kitchen leans into what interior designers are currently calling quietly dramatic, black or deep green cabinetry, honed stone counters instead of polished, and brass or aged bronze hardware providing the only bright reflective note in the room. It photographs as luxury. It also means every fingerprint and water spot shows more than it would on a white shaker cabinet. which is a livability trade-off, not just an aesthetic one. Here's where the story gets more complicated, and where a lot of these builds quietly go over budget in a way that doesn't show up until the first summer power bill arrives. Black absorbs solar heat more aggressively than any other color, on a roof or a wall. That's not a design opinion. It's basic physics, and manufacturers of black metal roofing and siding are explicit about it in their own technical literature. True black exteriors require premium PVDF coatings, commonly branded Kiner 500, to survive UV exposure and resist fading, and even with that coating, a black roof runs meaningfully hotter than a lighter one. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates that light-colored, reflective cool roof products can reduce cooling costs by 10 to 15% in warm climates, translating to roughly $200 to $400 a year in energy savings on a typical home. A true black roof gives up most of that savings. Over a 30-year building life, in a hot climate, that's a 5-figure difference in cumulative cooling costs between the darkest option and a reflective one. Money that never shows up on the initial construction estimate, because it's spread across 3 decades of utility bills instead of one closing statement. This is exactly why experienced barndominium designers building in Gothic-influenced styles increasingly steer clients toward deep charcoal rather than true black, especially for roofing in the Southeast, Texas, and the Southwest. Charcoal reads as black from the street and in photographs. It performs meaningfully better thermally. It's a compromise that costs nothing extra and quietly protects the homeowner from a mistake they wouldn't discover until their first July electric bill. The second complication is maintenance economics, and this one actually favors the trend. A conventional painted exterior needs full repainting every 8 to 12 years, at $12,000 to $20,000 per cycle on a home this size, 2 to 4 cycles over a 40-year building life, adding up to $24,000 to $80,000 in repainting costs alone. A properly Kiner-coated black or charcoal steel panel doesn't need repainting on that schedule. It needs periodic washing. So while the black steel exterior costs more upfront in coating premium, it can actually out-earn a traditional painted exterior over decades, provided the coating spec was done correctly the first time. That's the real financial verdict on Modern Gothic for a barndominium. It is not automatically a value trap, and it is not automatically a smart investment. It splits cleanly along one line, whether the dark color is a coating decision made with the building's structure and climate in mind, or a paint decision made purely because a photo looked good online. Put the pieces together and a pattern emerges. The builds where Modern Gothic actually performs well over time share 3 things in common. They use materials that read as permanent, stone or manufactured stone at the base, quality steel with real structural weight in the roofline, not just a dark paint job over a standard shape. Appraisers and buyers alike respond to that sense of substance more than to color alone. They apply restraint to the signature elements. One arched entry, a steep gable on the primary elevation, a deliberate dark-to-light material transition, rather than every window arched and every surface black, which tips into costume rather than architecture. And they account for climate honestly. Charcoal instead of true black in hot regions. Proper coating specification instead of standard paint. Lighting design that compensates for a darker palette instead of leaving rooms underlit. Builds that skip those 3 things, the ones chasing the look purely because it's having a moment, are the ones most likely to feel dated in 5 years and cost more to cool for as long as they stand. So does Modern Gothic hold its value? Or is it a trend that fades? The honest answer is that the label on the style was never really the deciding factor. A steep roofline and a dark palette are just design tools. What determines whether a home built this way becomes a lasting, valuable piece of architecture or an expensive, dated statement is the same thing that's always determined that outcome. Material honesty, climate-appropriate decisions, and restraint. The homes getting this right aren't chasing drama for its own sake. They're using a handful of bold, well-executed choices to say something specific and leaving the rest of the building to support that statement instead of competing with it. That's really the through line behind every striking home on this channel. And it's the same tension we're diving into next, because a bold exterior and a moody interior only tell half the story of how a house actually lives. The other half happens at the boundary between inside and outside, where some of these same steel and glass barndominium designs are quietly rewriting what that boundary even means. That's next time on Barndo Dreams, breaking down indoor-outdoor living integrations, the sliding walls, courtyard layouts, and covered porch designs turning barndominiums into homes that barely have a front door at all.